Welcome, everyone. We're at the top of the hour and want to get started promptly. My name is Ken Levinson, the Executive Director of the Passive House Network, and I'm very pleased to have with me today with us Lois Arena, the Director of Passive House Services at Stephen Winter Associates, to talk about Passive House certification with a specific focus on multifamily. As we get going here, and as folks are coming in from the waiting room, I want to just say a few words of introduction and introduction to the certification process briefly. So the network, as many of you probably already know, we're a national 501c3 nonprofit. We have regional chapters as well as members from across the US and around the world, frankly. We're about connecting global knowledge to regional contexts and local applications. We are affiliated with the Passive House Institute and the International Passive House Association, based out of Darmstadt, Germany. And really, the global character of this movement and being able to learn from each other is really a fantastic strength of Passive House in general. We work with the North American Certifiers Circle, which we'll talk a little bit more about briefly, a group of certifiers working in the United States and Canada on Passive House buildings. We're focused on education and capacity building. So the CPHD, Certified Passive House Designer course, the tradesperson course, issues around building certification. We want to make sure that you are continuously learning and we can grow Passive House successfully. So we hope you join us and come to future events, which I want to briefly note here. Coming up on April 27th, we're very happy to have Daphne Rose Sanchez from Kinetic Communities Consulting to talk about connecting underserved communities with sustainability opportunities, part of our ongoing PHN DEI initiative. Then on May 18th, we'll have Bronwyn Berry and Steve Mann presenting on a single family home embodied carbon calculation using the pH ribbon, which plugs into the PHPP and allows you to have a whole carbon emissions calculation from operations, from the energy use calculated in the PHPP to the embodied carbon that you're calculating in the pH ribbon in one overall calculator. We have ongoing Certified Passive House Designer courses, both hybrid, regionally focused, on demand, that you can take anytime, where the exams are given quarterly, as well as in-house trainings that we are happy to provide for companies or organizations, areas that want that. And finally, for the upcoming events, do save the dates. The Passive House Conference we are planning for the fall in Denver, Colorado, and online. It will be a hybrid, and we'll be excited to bring international, national, regional projects, issues, topics, and get together. So with that, let's get to the topic at hand. And just Lois probably needs no introduction, but I will sort of perfunctorily give it a shot here. She's the director, as I mentioned, of Passive House Services at Stephen Winter Associates. She possesses over 25 years of experience in the building science field and has extensive experience with new and existing buildings. Lois holds both US and international Passive House consultant certifications and is currently consulting on some of the largest and most difficult Passive House projects in the world. She's co-authored and presented training programs about energy efficient building practices to professionals in all sectors of the building industry and is regularly invited to present at conferences and private firms around the world to discuss the benefits of and roadblocks to Passive House adoption. And isn't that really what we're talking about here today? And I think occupies a lot of our energies and thoughts about how to move this forward and scale it up. So we're going to get to Lois in just a minute. I apologize. I just want to give a rat-a-tat-tat on the building certification overview. Many of you may be familiar with this, but some also will be the first time. So let's just hit this. There are over 100 certifiers accredited by the Passive House Institute in Darmstadt around the world. It's over 110 now and growing. There are 14 separate organizations actively working on Passive House certification in the US and Canada, and over 30 individuals. So this forms the core of the NACC. You can work with accredited certifiers from around the world if they have a competency and familiarity with the local conditions. We encourage you to take a look at the options. The criteria, the foundational document, has recently been updated, which we're really excited about, consolidating a lot of information, clarifying certain aspects of information. And just this week, it was further released as 10C, version 10C, with extended passages within the criteria itself, and really bringing in a bunch of information from the certification guide into the criteria document, consolidating further, so you have a clearer reference and more compact reference within this extended version of what you need to be doing. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that. The certification levels are many. There are 3-4 new buildings of the Passive House certification, the Classic, Plus, and Premium, as well as an array of ENERFIT certifications for retrofits, as well as a retrofit ENERFIT plan certification for long-term renovations. And then we have the PHI low energy building for the near misses to the Passive House Classic, and can be used as quite a robust fallback when getting to the Passive House Classic just might not happen. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that as well. Let's see what happened here. ENERFIT, 2 options: performance, component based. I'm not going to get into this, but if you're not familiar with it, it's definitely worth looking into. It has existed since 2011 and has quite a track record at this point. The certification process flow, there are some good references for this. The building certification guide, which I mentioned, is a standalone document, and definitely encourage you to take a look at that. On the back of the North American Certifiers Circle brochure, we have a very abbreviated overview. And I should note, this slide deck and actually this abbreviated introduction is available on our building certification page on our website. So all of this can be reviewed. The certification submissions tracking is a platform many certifiers use, not necessarily everyone. Some of them have their own, but it's a cloud-based system for being able to track the documents that have been submitted, that have been checked off to green, and have a clear idea of what's outstanding to try to help simplify and expedite the process. There are many certification resources on our website, as well as on the PHI website and other organizations, companies' websites that are working with international standard. Encourage you to check it out. QR code for that should pop up again. Many tools to work within certification. One of the prime ones, which I think we'll talk a little bit about, is Design PH and its role, but many others, and they're listed on the PHI website and within Passopedia. Take a look there. And there are tools being developed by practitioners around the world continually and being shared, many of them for free, and encourage. Some of them end up on the PHI list. Some may not have yet, but encourage you to look at those. A little known reference, which is important, is within the project database that PHI hosts, the Passive House database, which must be said is a voluntary database and has only a tiny fraction of the buildings that PHI has certified or that are being intended to be built to certifiable levels of the buildings in the world. But there is a great list there nonetheless. And it's important to note that you can click into the projects and find information. And we just want to point out the project documentation can be quite interesting and extensive. This project is Cornell Tech, which Lois worked on, and it has like a 40-page document that goes into all kinds of aspects about the building, which is truly interesting, informative, and useful. So some projects have videos and other things. So there's a lot of resources there to take advantage of. When you get certified, you get a certificate with the basic parameters of the building. You can get a plaque to put on the wall. In addition to that, 2 videos that are on our certification page, which I'd like to just highlight. One Matt Bowers did about a year ago on certification tips, which is really around cost control around certification with the international standard, really good. And then the one that I did recently for Mass Save in Massachusetts with their adoption of passive house, mandatory passive house certifications in growing number of jurisdictions, to really go through soup to nuts. So today is not going to be a to Z walkthrough certification. We're just going to hit kind of hot topics, what people might be interested in, what we're interested in. But this presentation really walks you through the whole thing and encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't, aren't so familiar with the process. At the end of the day, it's all about teamwork. It's really how it's going to happen. So with that, let's talk, Lois. So if folks could put questions in, and I am completely lost on my screens, no matter how many times I do this.
In the waiting room, just so you know, everybody's been admitted. So
everybody's in.
everybody's in.
Great. And we'll see if there are any further stragglers. But if everybody has any particular questions that have been, burning in the back of your mind or just recently come up, please drop them into the chat. I want to have a conversation with Lois around her role as a certifier, first and foremost, and what she sees in the projects, what projects she's working on as a certifier. Of course, she's also a consultant. So she's sitting on both sides of the table from project to project. And so really has a powerful perspective in that way. This slide I just want to note before we dive into the subjects is, just the big picture. When you're certifying, because there are multiple certifiers, you're going to want to get proposals from certifiers and hire a specific one. You're often going to be doing in that process an initial check, what special aspects and really nail down peculiarities of the project. Then there are essentially, and this can vary from how teams look at it, but fundamentally 3 parts to the process, where that early design, and you have a preliminary review and design assessment, and then the design stage review before construction starts. And it's not a pre-certification in PHI parlance. You may get a letter of design assurance that if the building is built to the specifications as it's understood within those drawings, and that it should be certifiable, as they say. And then the final review after construction completion. So there's much more detail on this in the various documents, references, that other video. We won't go into it here, but just want to give that bigger frame. And then with the final review and acceptance, the issue of the certificate.
If we could just stick on this page for
Yeah,
1 second.
absolutely.
So what we usually do, or recommend, if you are an experienced consultant and have done this type of project over and over and over again, right? You feel very comfortable. You don't necessarily need to engage your certifier early, right? You can engage them, say, at 100% CVs or 50% CVs, just to get that process started, because it takes some time and everybody's busy. But if you are doing something unusual or that you've never done before, do it. But just engage your certifier earlier, and engage a certifier who either has experience with that type of project as a consultant or as a certifier. It doesn't matter. They do both. If they have experience with that type of a project, then engage them at the beginning of DD, SD. Say, what do I need to be aware of before I start this type of a project? That usually helps set all the nerves straight and get you comfortable in your role. So, do anything that you're not familiar with, just engage help earlier. That's all my recommendation is.
That's a great point, Lois. And I think Christina was wondering about the audio. You're a little scratchy.
Am I really?
Um,
In my office, hooked up to all the hardwired stuff. Am I scratchy to you too, Ken?
You're a little scratchy to me, but
Okay,
yeah, a little bit going. I don't know if it's just the way the microphone is placed, or
it's my
I
computer.
think everybody, I can't, it looks like everybody's muted, but you and me.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe we've got one. No, everybody's, yeah.
Okay, I'll go
Well,
slow.
it's a great point about when do you bring in the certifiers, and when do you need to, and really depends on the experience of the team. I talk a little bit about sometimes where if they're very experienced teams, and they've done the project many times and they're fully confident, they could not hire a certifier until the project's done, and have it completely certified after the fact. This has happened with single family homes. I know there was a small multifamily in Boston where this was essentially certified after the fact by Certifiers Cooperative, and successfully. And it's a matter of having the documentation, having things done correctly, being able to have all the proper answers to the questions.
Exactly. You
So
need to make sure that that consultant who was working on it knew exactly the type of
yeah,
documentation. So they're gathering it the whole way because there's no going back, right? Yeah.
yeah. So I yeah, it's definitely recommended to go earlier. It's more conservative, but in terms of process and everything, you have options. So we had tossed around a couple of bullet points here, and we want to speak to those. Lois has, Christina had a question. Have you ever had someone engage you so late to certify that you had to deny certification?
Many times.
Could you describe like what a typical
Um,
situation might be?
yeah, the team came to us and they had already started drywalling. So they didn't have the proper photo documentation. They didn't have the measurements, that sort of stuff. We weren't personally going to allow infrared to prove anything. Like they just had nothing. And of course they were like, oh, we're really budget constrained. So I was like, cross it off. Let's do not. We can't. We've also had people come to us at 100% CDs for larger projects. That one I'm talking about was a smaller, like a single family home. We've had people come to us in 100% CDs and say, we want to try Passive House. And we explain the cost that could possibly be for redesign of the whole project, right? Like if we do this analysis and we find, we're going to charge you this much, if we find that you, and this is without an experienced consultant on board, okay?
Right.
Never turn anybody away that's had an experienced consultant on board that's been in the construction process. Like never. If they've had an experienced consultant with them, we've never turned anybody away. We've only turned people away who say, our architect is certified, but nobody's done the PHPP, nobody's done this.
Right.
That's when we turn them away, right? We've never
Right.
turned a team away that has the software and modeling done and all of that stuff. Only
Yeah.
when that's it.
Yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize if you're new to Passive House and you're thinking about doing a project or have a project and you're thinking about making it a Passive House project, that you really don't assume anything and start at the beginning, asking questions, bringing in people who have done it. Everybody on a team doesn't have to have experience. It would be impossible to grow the ecosystem in that way, but you do need somebody with experience, somebody who can point you and connect you. The certifiers can be a key resource in that way. So bringing in when you're doing your first project, to bring in a certifier very early to make sure that you've got the training, you've got the consultants. It will be much stronger, I think. Is that fair to?
Absolutely fair. I honestly, my biggest recommendation as a certifier is hire a consultant to do the energy modeling for you if you're not comfortable with that technical aspect of it. I wouldn't even go to a certified first because technically we're not supposed to certify and consult on the same project. Like that's sort of a conflict of interest. We should be two different entities. You should have a designer on board
Right,
if you're not experienced. And then we just do the QA QC check for you, right?
right.
So my
That's
biggest recommendation is to have a consultant that's experienced. And if you are, this is another thing. If you are say you're an architect and you're running a project and you're a certified CPHC, excuse me, CPHD, um, hire somebody to mentor you. You hire a supplemental consultant. We've done that. They said they wanted to hold the PHPP in house. They wanted to do the modeling, but they weren't experienced. And so we've just given them as a consultant. We've just reviewed their PHPP. We've given them consulting information. So don't be afraid to do that either. Like I would, branch out, do some new stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that idea. We need to develop that in terms of
Absolutely.
hired mentors in a way. We're actually starting a program for recent CPHD students to have, and that are members of PHN as initially a member benefit, to have mentors to pair them with experienced folks. But to actually have a more widely available commercial aspect to it is
And
tremendous.
here in New York, NYSERDA has a mentor program for up to $10,000. So if you need to hire somebody to help mentor you, you should investigate NYSERDA's mentor program. We've used it for that side of it. Most of the times we use it for the field side, where we go in and we do intermittent testing on windows and stuff, and we uh, show the field staff who are doing the window installs and all the air sealing what's working and what's not working. So we've used it on that side, but you can use it on the design side as well.
That's fantastic. I did not know that.
Oh, you didn't know, Ken? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
Um, it's incredible. Great. So let's dive into some of the specifics here, and I think we'll kind of go around and go into details and to bigger picture as it makes sense. So when I had asked you a little bit about what were some things that you see that, just get in the way of certification, and you can take care of to make things quicker, simpler, more straightforward.
Yeah.
You
And
gave us a few dots here.
this is
So
based on,
removing any,
yeah,
what's that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is based on, these first three dots are based on a recent review we were doing. They're forward in my mind.
Right. So, and maybe we'll expand on it a little bit. So remove any unused data in the PHPP. So maybe unpack that a little bit. What did you see? What do you do as a consultant? And then as a certifier, how you're seeing it?
So a lot of times so we set up our initial PHPP, right? Get all your takeoffs done. They're enormous buildings, right? So they're enormous files. So you're not going to keep redoing them. So what we do is, let's just use Windows for an example. We'll start with an original window assumption. And then as the team goes through their bid buy process, they'll try a number of different windows and a number of different specs. And so we'll put them all in the PHPP on the components tab and we'll play with those, right? Well, by the end of the day, you have like all these different frames and all these different windows and so leaking coefficients and things like that in the PHPP, so you can quickly go back and forth. Take those out. The ones that you're not using at the end for final certification, take them out. Because then I have to go search for all the data sheets that match all of the stuff that's in your PHPP and go through all. And now for these large buildings, we can have almost thousands of rows of window inputs, especially in version 9.7, which is what we're still using here.
On that project.
Yeah, so we have so many rows, and then I gotta scroll through, see what's used, what's not used. Please remove anything that you're not, that is not officially on the project. Yeah.
So is it's a matter of just like clearing the static in some sense, but have you seen where there's just, inputs that are throwing the model, or the models are pretty well locked down at that point? But
The models are pretty well locked down. They're pretty well locked down. Yeah, they're we generally work with people who work on large buildings as well, so they're generally more experienced. So we don't see a lot of really big mistakes in these PHPPs. We really generally don't. But yeah, it because you can have that, Ken. Like you can, like if you're not an experienced person and you don't realize this is still active, in my Windows sheet, I've actually had this still chosen in some of my inputs, then that can cause a big problem if it's not the real window that you're using. But this is mostly final review after construction.
Right.
HPP. Yeah.
Right. It's not midstream.
Right. Right.
That was a big thing where Maureen Sanchez was on at the end of last year. And really, because when you're in the design phase or late design going into construction, changes are happening all the time. And the PHPP is never going to match with the drawings. And to being really clear as to where things are going and what's what, like.
The communication is really imperative. Like,
Yeah.
you as a designer are telling me, ignore this. This is what is in the current design right now. This is what they're thinking right now. Ignore the drawings, ignore this. Here's what we're using.
Right. Okay, good. So I'm just going to read this here. Clearly indicate to the certifier where your supporting documentation was uploaded on the portal, the name of the file, and what information is being conveyed. For example, the spacers, psi values, the thermal bridge, parapets, etc. So this speaks to that a bit. Maybe if you can go into, like, I don't know, how you're working with the portal and the platform and managing that.
So we require everybody that we work with, or that we're the certifier for, to use the portal. And for a couple of reasons. One is because we want to create a standard process that makes this faster and more cost effective for everybody. So we're familiar with the portal, you're familiar with the portal, this becomes a quicker process. It also helps us give feedback to PHI on what's working, what's not working. It is clunky, right? Like I'm not gonna lie, it's clunky. But as long as you say so, I don't know, Ken, you had a picture of it up there for a minute,
Yeah.
but like there's different tabs as you go through that refer to windows. There's the architectural drawings, there's your PHPP, there's thermal bridging, there's all this stuff. And a lot of times what it's asking for is something repeated that you already put up somewhere else. As long as you just say C tab 2.1, this document, that's fine with me. You don't have to upload it 16 times throughout the portal, but the communication in the portal is key. Because if PHI is reviewing my certification package, if I can't find a document, they're certainly not going to be able to find a document, right? So that's
right.
more time, that's back and forth and that sort of thing. So very clearly identify if it's asking for a piece of documentation and you don't want to put it in that spot. If you've already put it, just put a note in for the certifier. It's in this section, it's called this. Simple.
Right. Yeah, making it as intuitive as possible.
Yeah.
We can't all create our own Dewey Decimal System, right? It's like,
we don't allow people to submit to us other than the portal.
Yeah. Fantastic. If the documents are long, tell the certifier which pages. Oh, well, I think you just did that. Yes.
Well, no, this is different actually. So, we get these submittals, right? That, like, say your installation submittal, it's going to be like 35 pages long. It's going to tell you the fire ratings. It's going to tell you the material breakdown. You get the MSD sheets, everything you need to know except for what the freaking R value is per inch, right?
You need one number.
Right. It's like on page 75 of 90, right? So at the beginning of that document, please tell me where the information is I need. Look at page 90, and then on page 90, you highlight, especially window data sheets have like rows and rows and rows of tables. Which one did you use for this project? I need you to highlight that for me so that I can go into your PHPP and say, yep, this matches that. That's all you need to do. But it saves a ton of time. I seriously, I spent probably half an hour looking through a 4-page window sheet U values and solid heat gain coefficients document the other day to try and match which one they used to the PHPP. I was like, oh. So just highlight what you've used.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything we can do to simplify that and speed it up. I mean, the speed is the big thing, right? I mean, it can just draw itself out. I mean, what do you, to take a step back there, you know, if you could speak a little bit, if broadly, if needed, to be how you structure your certification contract. Like, I mean, is it a time, base plus time, or is it just hourly, or
So
based
we
on the experience of the
used,
customer?
yeah, we've just recently changed it in the last couple months. We used to structure it just like everybody else seemed to structure it, all the other certifiers in PHI, where they had the design stage review, construction review. And so there were lump sums, and you paid half up front and half at the when that review was done. Same thing with the construction. So you had these three major chunks. And so you could be working for a year before you actually could bill for that. So we've recently changed it. We still give you a total, like not,
Right.
not to exceed sort of total lump sum total, but we're going to bill along the way. And so that's sort of how we changed it, because really you could be going 6 months to a year working on something without a finished product, because somebody needs to ask you a couple questions here, they need to ask you a couple questions here, they want you to okay this, they want you to okay that. And then you've got, before you know it, 20, 30 hours on the boards that you can't bill for because you don't have a DSR for them, right?
Hmm.
It's usually used, which is how you originally wrote your contract. So we've recently changed how we do that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Great. So, our friend Kent Gonzalez has a question.
Hello.
Um, on the Hi Kent, good to have you here. The On the uptake in Massachusetts and the concern about capacity, um, where we have, I don't know, Stephen from your office, Stephen Moore, I think just mentioned yesterday or the day before that there's 7 towns now that have adopted the opt-in code. And do we know if Boston has officially adopted it yet?
On the mayor's desk.
Yes,
Yeah,
they did.
Awesome.
they did.
Did the mayor sign it off?
She hasn't signed it, but she's the one asking for it, so I don't think there'll be any problem with her
Right.
signing it.
So
Yeah,
any moment now. So the
Yeah.
council passed it. That's fantastic.
that's
So
great.
so it brings up capacity issues and how do we scale? Any thoughts on scaling, Lois? And how
Yeah,
you're gonna
Kent,
survive?
I'm not going to drop a bomb on you right now, but I will tell you in May, there will be a big announcement for an increase in capacity for handling these projects. So stay tuned. Okay. I can't say it.
It's a big preview,
Yeah, I can't
a
say it.
teaser.
Yes.
All right.
We are working on this.
You've all been teased.
We have been working on this for probably over a year now, and this is perfect timing. And we're going to unveil it at the Passive House Canada conference in Toronto in May.
In
Next,
Hamilton, yes.
yeah, stay tuned.
Well, you can do it sooner if you'd like. Do it in America first. Just to test it.
Email me separately. I'll let you know what's happening.
All right. We're so definitely, I think capacity is on everybody's mind, and figuring out how to ways to build it quickly. Great. So a couple of things that I wanted to dive into were one of the things I've heard comments about inputs and inputting into PHPP, and that some folks are not necessarily, it's not the most architect friendly,
Mm.
perhaps interface. I think that's fair to say. And as an architect and former PHPP user, and I was surprised. So in the context of multifamily in particular, but I think in projects in general, the sense that I was getting, and I wanted to get your take on this, is that everybody's pretty much doing the initial input into design PH, not the PHPP, and manipulating and exporting to PHPP. How do you see the balance of work, and what is working for you all? Both, I guess, asking with both hats on, the synergies and the process between design PH and PHPP. And for those who aren't familiar, design PH is a SketchUp model that's been developed and adapted for Passive House, specifically the International Passive House Standards from PHI, and to work with the PHPP.
Now, I'm gonna ask for Christina, and you can maybe to correct me here, but here's how we're working right now. We've been using Design PH for our large buildings for a long time because it does a shading analysis that gets exported to PHPP. We are not allowed to use any other shading tool to do that shading analysis. So we have to use Design PH, from what I know, and I've been back and forth with PHI in the last couple of months on this, because we don't have a Design PH for version 10 of the PHPP. So if I can't use any other shading software and I don't have a Design PH 10 that can export into Design PH to PHPP 10, I can't use PHPP 10. So in the US, in any other place in the whole world,
IP.
saying that you can use SI units, you have been able to use this for probably over a year now. But in the US, for IP units, we have not been able to use PHPP 10 yet. From what I understand, Design PH as a certifier is required because it does the shading analysis for you. So I would love to hear from the people who do smaller projects. Are you being required to use Design PH or not? Can you use another shading tool? Because we were told.
So we should put out there that, so Tad Everhart and Christina is on the line here in the chat, and they're both certifiers.
So the building geometry more so than, not so much. So it's not reliant on building geometry so much as neighboring city buildings. That's
Right.
what Christina's saying. So for our projects, which are all pretty much urban projects, we need to use the Design PH.
Right.
From what I understand.
So
And
it's not a requirement, to my knowledge. It is a practical requirement, I think, as Lois points out, for reasonable accuracy on your large buildings. But I think what we're seeing, Lois, is when we started certifying back in 2015, no one was using Design PH. Now on our single family homes and our duplexes, I'd say Design PH is used at least in a solid third, maybe almost a half. And it really truly is the way of the future for accuracy. Oftentimes we'll be right on the edge of being able to certify a building based on the old-fashioned horizontal distances and relative heights for the shading. And on a building where it really depends on the passive solar gain, we strongly urge them to take that step of getting a Design PH model, because invariably we get more solar gain calculated that way, and it helps certify. Plus, everyone likes the accuracy.
Yeah, doesn't the new criteria say that you can't use any other software for shading than Design PH?
I think that's correct. I mean, obviously,
well, there is PH, and I think there's some pathways through that. If one of the 4 types of BIM software that works with the BIM to PHPP interface, you can create the geometry, including the shading in that, and bring in the results to PHPP. But we've never had a project do that.
Okay.
right. So Elena, who's also on the line here for PHI,
Okay, good.
clarified that it's not a requirement. Design PH is not a requirement.
So the alternative is to use the shading workspace, but for a large building, I don't think you're going to use the shading.
It's not practical.
Yeah.
Not in New York City.
But
Well,
Lois, what is wonderful is to see Ed May and John Mitchell experimenting with Ladybug, and of course they use Design PH so they can do internal comparisons for accuracy. And we've got a person certifying a nice 70s A-frame in Kansas that they're interfitting, and they're using the PH Live Sync developed, I think, in Australia. And so I'm hoping that we can get someone to put that model. I know the building's already been put in Design PH. So ideally we can get some comparisons with these new tools, and perhaps, can't speak for PHI, but perhaps over time, PHI will become comfortable with some of these tools, because the architect in this Kansas project really wanted to use the PH Live Sync because they're a Revit shop. They use Revit on every single family home they do. And so we're going to look at it and see if we can, do our own internal comparisons and at least kind of vet that a little bit internally.
right, Todd. We
I also wonder, Lois's question about where when there is no design pH interface yet for PHPP 10, is there a input export tool to go from PHPP 9 to PHPP 10? Because that might be a route to get your design pH
not in IT.
information in.
There is
Not in IT.
Yeah, we're in transition
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So by the end of 2023, we'll be smooth sailing, right, Lois?
2030.
2030.
I'd almost rather have to model in metric and be able to use design pH than to go without it.
We're still using 9.7 here.
Yeah.
But the new projects,
The new project,
There
we're
will be 10.
some advantages.
Yeah.
Design
So-
in PHPP 10.
Yeah.
so going forward, everyone should, be confident, you know.
Yeah.
With that integration. All right. Next topic I thought we'd just throw out there, always fun, is typical multifamily, especially folks coming to the projects for the first time in the context of passive house. Where are we with knowing what we need to do, what specifications are, what are the open things that teams should be like, companies aren't really aware of this, or we need more suppliers regarding the trash chutes, the elevators, and issues around parking garages is kind of a different animal, but nonetheless is, where you have the building on top of a unconditioned space or.
Yeah, that's not so hard. The parking garages are, they're basically a cantilevered floor. You're right. That's how you treat them. You treat them like it's outside space, like it's ambient air, and then you make sure you're insulating to the comfort for the
Right.
criteria there. The issue with them sometimes is if you have apartments that are on the floor above is sometimes the drain lines go down into unconditioned space. And there's the constant need or desire. This happens more in our low-rise projects than our high-rise projects, but there's the constant desire from the MEP to want to put electric trace heat tape on those pipes. And so we kind of have to back them up and be like, okay, how much do you need? Is it have a temperature sensor on it? So we've had some projects where it's just basically around the P-trap, right? Because most of the piping is sloped and it's mostly just drain lines. It's not water supply lines. We don't really allow that, but it's the drain line. It's the P-trap because water will sit in that. And how do we keep that from freezing? So there's some issue with that. But parking garages in general aren't so difficult. Trash chutes, we basically have a standard method for handling those in our high-rise buildings, and it's going to be different, I know, in different cities around the country and in different countries, but they're open at the top and they're open at the bottom. So if you have a 26-story building, there's a hood on top with the trash chutes open, and then there's at the very base you have a trash compactor in that trash, and it's open to the bottom so that the people put their trash in on each floor, it falls right into the trash compactor. So basically, all you really need to do is treat that trash room at the base like that has its own air barrier. All the doors, all the penetrations, everything have to be airtight, right?
Or
So
the trash room, the trash compactor room.
Compactor room at the base.
Yeah.
At the top, you don't do anything outside, but every floor, there's usually a CMU wall around that, a fire rated wall. It doesn't have to be CMU, it can be 200 fire rated metal frame wall, whatever that wall is. You need to make sure that wall is very well air sealed at the top and bottom of each floor too, right? So that you don't get air and you're reducing the stack effect on every floor. And then you also, the trash chute door that you pull open to push your trash in, that one is a fire rated assembly. There's really nothing you can do about it. You can't put a gasket on it. If it doesn't come with a gasket, it hasn't been tested. None of them have gaskets. We haven't seen anyone with a gasket. So that little door is going to have some air leakage to it. It's not a huge amount when you do it. We tested them. We had them on Cornell. It was our first big project. We were freaking out about these doors. We're like, oh my God, what can we do? And they're really only like 30 CFM per 20 to 30 CFM per door. So in the whole grand scheme of thing, it's not that big a deal.
So you're not sealing the floor vestibules at each floor.
We are sealing the wall that surrounds that tube.
Right,
chute-
the tube, but not the vestibule that you're standing in when you open the
No, if you walk,
trash chute.
you open, so the room you walk into to put your trash through that little chute door
Yeah.
is, it usually has an undercut in the door into that room because there's usually an exhaust in that room.
Ah, so you can't have
It
airtightness.
balances, right, it balances the corridor supply.
Got
So
it.
you have a few CFM coming in the corridor and you're gonna extract from that trash room to help deal with smells. And to balance the ventilation system, keep it balanced. So, right, you don't have to seal that room that you go into, you don't have to seal that, you're just sealing the wall that surrounds the chute itself.
Got it. Yeah, so it's like a bunch of little entry doors to the building that are gonna leak a little bit.
Exactly, these little, right, right, yeah, but it's really not that impactful.
Cool. And what about elevators?
The elevators used to have, every shaft used to have an opening at the top for smoke and fire. I think it was smoke. There's
Yeah.
so there, in your multifamily buildings, you can have fire dampers and you can have smoke dampers. They do very different things, and they close and open at different times. This is one of those big learning experiences for me when I went into multifamily. So a elevator shaft at the top will have a smoke damper, and what that's meant to do is, if there's a fire, clear out the smoke for the firefighters, right? So that just goes up and out. It used to have to be open no matter what time of year. In the past few years, because of all of the in New York City, and so it used to have to be open. And then in the past few years, because of the emphasis on energy efficiency and all of these laws that we've been passing here, they got it to so that it is intertwined with smoke detectors. So it can be closed. They call it an A1 damper. That's the tightest damper, mechanical damper you can get. It's closed all the time. If there's a fire, the smoke damper opens and helps save it. So they're leaky. They're not open. Again, the larger the building, the smaller the impact. So our buildings that I would say are probably 6 to 8 stories, around 50,000 square feet. That's kind of where our cutoff is for projects that we get. We don't usually take things that are much smaller than that. Budget wise, it doesn't work for our clients.
Mhm.
But so 6 to 8 stories, you figure they've got these smoke dampers and the elevator shafts, right? They've got all of the trash chute doors. And so think about, I've got less surface area, smaller building, same number of holes as a 26-story building, much more surface area. So it's easier for the larger buildings to
Right.
absorb all of this extra damper leakage than it is for the smaller buildings. Smaller buildings have a little harder time meeting this. So if you're working on anywhere from 3 to where you're going to see an elevator, right? 3 to 8 to 10, I would say 3 to 8 stories. The air leakage requirements become a little more stringent. You got to make sure, because of all of these extra chutes and dampers and stuff, that you got to make sure that you're really super tight. And
Right.
everything else, yeah.
All right, good. And I guess another aspect of elevators, which I've heard, various things in the evolution of nailing down the energy use, that there are potentially the manufacturers don't have all the information, or it's difficult to figure out. Or am I just not hearing that correctly? I feel
Elevators?
like there's a spec issue with elevators.
Elevators, so anywhere else other than, I think it might be the US and maybe North America, they're required to give you this data breakdown, the energy use for their particular model. Not here, right? So they just got in ASHRAE a requirement for a minimum of a D grade, I think it was.
A what?
A grade of D, right? Right. So like, I think they just got that into action in this last version. Like they're fighting. But anytime in the last 10, 12 years that I've asked any elevator manufacturer or any engineer or any building owner, if they can tell me what the energy use is of that particular elevator, I've gotten zero information. So we really don't know what elevators are using. Personally, from our when we do certification here, we were using New York. NYSERDA has no, it's actually Energy Star multifamily guidelines for modeling has a chart in it that tells you how many kilowatt hours to assume per year, depending on how tall your building is and the number of units in your building. Okay, so it has this
Real
estimate.
ballpark, yeah.
Yeah, we think it's about 10 times less than it needs to be based on the calculator.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So when we played with the calculator PHIs, but out, we're like, oh, this is way too low. So we have started using 10 times what that's. We just choose the number from that and we multiply it by 10, and we put it in our PHPPs to make sure we're accounting for the proper amount of kilowatt hours for our clients. There is a huge gap in what we model. And it's not just PHPP. It's, I think, all modeling software is a huge gap between what common area loads actually are and what we're modeling. They're much higher, and we don't really know why. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
And you're pulling data off of a bunch of multifamilies at this point. Are you measuring these sort of uses?
Well, we're pulling utility data. We're not pulling like BMS data, where they have a meter on it. We're pulling utility data. We're getting like 15-minute hourly data like from the utilities, which is great. But what we're doing through a Department of Energy grant is we're actually putting in really expensive monitoring on 3 of our largest multifamily buildings, which the installs have already started. So in a year, hopefully, I'll be able to tell you what these are.
And you'll be able to tell the common area usage.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. We look forward to that.
Me too.
Tad mentions in the chat that he's pulled Euro ratings on some elevators. I don't know if that.
But they're not the same, right, Tad? In the US, they're not the exact same models.
We knew for a fact that one was because the Euro rating had the exact model name and specifications. The other 2, we did get the manufacturer's name and the model. And one was for a single family home, and it was a Garaventa made in Switzerland. So we got a German certificate for it. And as far as we can tell, it's identical because we compared the specs that went with the certificate. But what was really unfortunate was the state and provincial distributor for the Garaventa elevator could not provide the European rating and didn't know what it was. The national supplier had no idea what the European rating was. If we hadn't been able to contact someone in Europe and get it in German, we never would have gotten it. But it and it made a big difference because it was an A-rated, and with the single family home, it was going to blow the PER pretty high.
Was it really for a single family home?
Yeah, we're getting in Vancouver and Victoria, I guess the property prices are so high that they'll do a elevator, in the house, and they're small. They cost about 25,000 Canadian, but we've had a couple houses with these elevators, and the PER, if it's entered as like a really bad standby power, can really hurt the PER on a single family home. So, and the first one that we had was actually an Otis elevator for the 6 and Kane project, and Gary Mosier, he just reached out and got on the Otis's own information. They had the Euro rating, which is really encouraging because I always think of Otis as a North American company.
Yeah, me too. And Otis used to have a calculator online years ago, and they took it down. So
Yeah. All right. It's interesting. So before we're getting close to time here, but let's see if we can hit a few other things. I think one big issue, maybe, something people grapple with or there are misconceptions about, is the idea of default values in the PHPP on energy calculation, and then changing some of the defaults and or doing variants where you're running out different use scenarios or climate scenarios. And I know that there is language from PHI that if you know that the use pattern is going to significantly deviate from the defaults, you need to do a variant, an alternative calculation to show that use pattern and what the results are going to be. So I'm wondering, just in your approach as a certifier, looking at projects that folks are doing, kind of how you're looking at these issues, and as a consultant, as a designer.
As a let's do certifier first since it's a certifier.
Yeah.
So if we see something that's alarming that we think is going to cause a comfort problem, like for instance, someone's in a cold climate and they're using a very high solar heating coefficient to meet the heating demand in it, and we know for a fact that in that type of a building, they're going to have overheating problems, not heating problems, overheating problems, right?
Right.
So we'll address it. We'll put a comment in. We'll just say, look, this is not against PHI's certification, but we highly recommend that the issue here is, so almost all of the Northeast cooling goes in new construction, right? You don't have buildings that get built with heating and not cooling, as opposed to like the Northwest Vancouver, where we do a lot of our certification projects. So we know that there's cooling available. What we make sure of is that they have the ability to use their cooling whenever they want to, and it's not heating's on at this time, cooling's on at this time, because we know they're going to need cooling into the swing season where older buildings won't, right? So we highlight that for people. We're very cognizant of that, especially the solar heating factor. And then we look at the heating system type that they're using. Is it a VRF that can only be in heating or cooling, or does it have the ability to do both? So we make recommendations, but there's nothing in the criteria that says you can't move forward, right? There's the 10%, you can't overheat 10%, but if you have a cooling system, that kind of negates it. But we need to make sure they're not going to overheat 10% when they have available. They don't have cooling available. So so that's a big issue for us. From a consultant side, we don't do these. We do variants in the design phase when we're trying to figure out what the best combination of components are for a particular project. More insulation, better windows, that kind of thing. So we use the variation then. We don't use it to do climate analysis because, like I said, all of our climates are going to have cooling. We know even just good new construction is all sort of ending, kind of pushing in this way where you're going to need cooling sooner. So we make our recommendations to our mechanical engineering teams and our mostly affordable housing builders that you're gonna have comfort complaints if you don't do this, right? So we make those things. If we're doing utility analysis for our clients, if we're saying here's what we think your actual annual energy use will be, we change the domestic hot water assumptions of gallons of hot water per person, and we increase our set point temperatures. We increase our heating to 70. We decrease our cooling to 72, and then we do the analysis that way. To do utility analysis, but that's not a certification, right? So those are the big things that we change, and they make the most difference. Honestly, I think the domestic hot water assumptions for North America, they're just low for past best. We just kind of know that, and then we give that to our builders and say, here's what's.
And would you say in general they're low, or just the default value is low? Or
the default values are low.
The default values are low for America. Sure. And I think it's an important distinction that people don't often grasp initially, is that, meeting the certification criteria means meeting the certification criteria, and that you've hit a level of performance. And personally, it may, depending on use, depending on the climate, depending on ultimate configurations, it may not be the exact building you want. And so what you're describing, Lois, of tweaking in these different ways, we're not going to be happy with 10% overheating or 8% overheating, right? We're going to want air conditioning and cooling, and it needs to be able to work within energy usage in that way. And so that the defaults can be very helpful, and set up the framework and get you to a certain point, but then it's really incumbent on the team to develop the specific requirements of the project.
Absolutely. And Christine made a good point in the chat. She's saying that, the defaults are more for European users, and it's absolutely true. I mean, their utility prices have been higher, traditionally, and they're much more conservative with their energy use. And like somebody told me, I can't remember if it was at one of the past conferences in Europe, they're like, no, we get in the shower, we turn the water on, we turn it on, we shut it, turn it off, and I'm like, oh, that's not what happens here. That's not what happens in the US, I know that. It's not what happens in my bathroom. So yes, I believe they are more thrifty.
Absolutely. So, and I think the final point on that is that there's the PHPP in the design process within Passive House gives you a lot of control over how you're controlling, how you're developing those variables and what you end up with.
Let me say
So
this.
keep your eyes wide open.
Yeah, from the heating demand perspective as well, like I can tell you, especially from the load perspective for single family and low-rise buildings, that load calculation is right on. Like I did a Building America project years and years ago where we monitored homes up in climate zone 6 in Ithaca and compared the actual peak load on those homes to what the PHPP was saying the design load would be, and it was spot on. It's
Wow.
a calculation. Cooling, I can't say I have the data for that. I think cooling is low. I think our cooling loads are higher here than the PHPP is saying, but I don't think dry
But they're
cell-
less than the heating load. So
they're actually similar in multifamily. Let me say
the
this:
peak load.
peak heating and cooling are similar. Yeah,
Ah,
and that's one of the data points I'm going to be showing you once I get all this damn data collected. Yeah.
all
So-
right. Interesting. That's interesting. Okay. All right. Well, we're at time. There's much more to, we could be talking about this all afternoon. I want to thank everyone for coming. We will certainly follow up and look to getting to some of these subjects in future events. I want to thank Lois for your time today. Also Christina and Tad and Elena for chiming in and helping. It's wonderful to see all these different voices. And again, so reach out, check out our certification page on PHN's website, check out PHI's website, and all the certifiers that you have to work with. There's just huge institutional knowledge base there that we need to utilize. And that's really one of the core elements of scaling up. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.